B2B success, we have found over more than a few years of experimentation comes from finding your lane. And I'm not just talking about us with the sales outsourcing company, but I'm talking about anybody who's doing B2B. So this idea, what we call brand sculpting, is not about advertising and branding and, multi-year persona development approaches, but a different approach in terms of finding a lane right away to get going. So Glenn, you want to explain kind of how we got to it and a little bit about how it works?
Sure. A big part of it was kind of a realization that we developed over time that a lot of these small companies almost didn't know who they were. Not unlike you're talking to a lot of solopreneurs, you have to go on a bit of a journey, understand who you are and what you have to offer, and what your own persona is, not just the persona of the people you want to go after. A lot of small companies don't go through that exercise themselves. And it's really important to know who you are and what you have to offer to then really understand why that offer will resonate to the people you want to go after and exactly who you want to go after. It's amazing how little thought people have given into what is the persona of their company and why will it matter to the people that they want to engage with.
I think one of the issues that I've noticed is years ago I was doing, this was actually one of the early clients for Call Sales Partners before it became OpGen, but it was three really good communicators. They did annual reports and sustainability reports for massive corporations. Like they did like Celanese's sustainability report. They were really at the top of that field. And when I went to work with them, I got them a ton of leads right away, but it was very difficult for them to turn those into real relationships. They didn't know how to do that. And they didn't know how to explain what they did at all. So I was just improvising constantly, and it worked to get a pipeline built. But in a lot of ways, it didn't work for them because they didn't know what they really wanted to do. And they just knew what they'd always done and what their skills were. So we hired, they paid 20 grand to actually a friend of mine to do a branding persona-based development exercise. And at the end, they had a nice looking website, and it helped me. It didn't help me at all because it was them rattling around in their own mind, telling him what they thought was going on with what they do and the market. And they had no idea.
Well, one of the things I always talk to people is one of the differences between sales and marketing. When you think about branding for marketing, you're trying to find the most general possible way of explaining yourself that will appeal to the most possible people you can, because you're trying to put out that big net to everyone. So marketing branding is always about, what is going to turn the most eyes, what is going to connect with the most people, even at a superficial level. But in sales, I'm not trying to give a general message to 1,000 people. I'm trying to have a real conversation with one person at a time. So if I'm going to have a real conversation with one person at a time, I better know who I am. And by me, I mean, the company I'm representing. I better know who we are. And I better know why that's important to this individual I'm talking to, not on a superficial level, but on a deeper level. How I'm going to help them and how what I can offer matters. One of the questions I always ask myself is, so what? And if you can't answer, so what, you have problems and you need to think it through. Why does it matter?
I think there's a decision that's got to get made because there's really two pathways here with multiple variations in between them. And one of the pathways is I'm going to put myself out in the market with a targeted brand. And that will have a personality. It will have a message. It will have a defined target market. It will have an avatar. It will have a path to purchase. And I'm going to throw that out there with all this content. The companies that I find in B2B and hardcore B2B, they don't want to do all that, and they can't afford it either. And then the results take forever. What you're talking about, I think, is the opposite of that. So it's who's my list? I want to know the names of the people. I want to sculpt my brand to connect in a conversation directly with the people on that list.
There's two types of sales, even B2B sales. There's a small, easy sale where a very general message to a broad audience works. If I'm selling some little piece of software where someone's gonna look at my website and put their credit card down and pay $19.99 a month, that's great. Traditional marketing works well. But if I've got something more complex, something more interesting, something that's going to really make a big impact on that business that I'm talking to, and it's going to cost, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, whatever it is, that simple general message isn't going to work. I need to really understand who I am, who my company is, what we have to offer, what the impact is, why they're interested. And I mean, when I say individual, I mean that persona of that title. Like a CEO is going to have a very different set of interests than a CTO, which will have a very different set of interests than a director of marketing, which will have even the CTO from the director of IT, from the network administrator, or the director of marketing from the person who's in charge of e-commerce to the person who's in charge of the website. Each one of those people have different needs, have different wants, have different things about their day that makes their life easier or more difficult. And if you haven't put in, it's not necessarily a lot of work, but if you haven't put in the work to understand that, you should be selling something for $19.99 where you put out a general message to the broader audience, and that's what it is. Because if you're doing something more serious, it's going to take that time.
So what Glenn's talking about, to put it in context, is there's B2C marketing. In other words, business to consumer marketing. So that's a strategy. It's very difficult, but it can be done by businesses selling anything. B2C. There's also what's called account-based marketing or account-based selling. Those are two different kind of things that can interrelate together. And what that means is knowing very specifically where you're going. What is the names of these companies? What are they like? Doing the analysis on them, understand how to speak to the different layers of decision makers in those organizations and influencers within those organizations, know who they are, find them on social media, connect with them through sales organizations and prospectors and all these kinds of things. The problem with that, so when I was trying to figure out that playbook years ago, as I was learning and trying to master account-based marketing, account-based selling, is it's too complicated. It's too expensive. So simplification of that becomes the challenge for a lot of these companies that say, yeah, I do want to figure out who I am and I want to point myself in that direction. Well, if you hire somebody to do an account-based marketing plan with you, how are you going to execute it?
Yeah, and that could be a real challenge. And I'll be honest, a lot of marketing and branding companies out there, from my sales perspective, overcomplicated. We basically put together a template to get what we need from a sales perspective. The first month of every client's engagement with us is, we call it brand sculpting. And we dig into, what is the history of the company? What is the product? What are the features? What are the advantages? We talk about the target markets we want to go after. And if you haven't thought this through, we'll sit down and think it through with you. What are your past clients? What have they gotten out of it? Why did they get certain things out of it? Are we looking for similar types of companies? How do we look for the ideal customer? Is it based on their revenue? Is it based on their employee count? Is it based on the tech stack they're using? Is it based on the industry they're in? It's a formula, but the first month of every engagement is our learning how to position a company so that we know how to talk to the different personas we're going after. So we know how to focus on the impact it will have on our organization, not just a checklist of features. How we know how to communicate, quite frankly. And it's not that hard, and it doesn't require an $80,000 marketing investment, but it does require a bit of thought.
It requires a bit of thought. And back in, I think it was maybe 2017 or 2018, my vision was to integrate marketing with prospecting and sales. So to have those three functions come into one department, a revenue department. That was my vision. I wanted to figure out how to do that. And what I noticed as I was doing it is the difficulty of getting the marketing people to understand what I was trying to do. And I don't know, I'd love to go back in QuickBooks and look at how much this cost, but anecdotally, I
Too
can't.
much.
I mean, how many marketing people did I pay on retainer, and for how long to get those capabilities into the department, so we weren't just doing lead gen and outbound sales and trying to full circle this thing into a revenue department. And I'm like, I can't think of any of them who understood at the end of the day now, looking back, what I was talking about.
Yeah.
They
You
had a
know,
different way of thinking.
one of the problems with too many marketers, and frankly, a marketing person in a big company, what I'm going to say makes perfect sense. But if it's a marketing company, a small company, it doesn't work. Most marketers think of marketing for marketing's sake. We want to get the brand in the market. We want to create awareness. We want people to recognize it. We want people, which is great if you're Pepsi and if you're Nike and if you're Salesforce and if you're one of these big brands where you want your brand to be out there. The having that brand recognition in and of itself has value. But if you're a small company pitching to large enterprise clients and you're doing, 5, 10, 25, 100 million in revenue, marketing for marketing's sake is not going to give you any value. The whole point of marketing in that situation is and should be just to enable sales. Is to drive some recognition and build some trust, not to the broader market, but only to those people that you care about, that you want to engage in conversations with. It should be sales-driven marketing, not marketing for marketing's sake. And the problem that you and I run into is so many of the marketers that we engaged with wanted to do marketing for marketing's sake, which just doesn't work for small business.
Without a fault, without an exception, every single one of them presented themselves to me as a lead generator. So they called it demand generation. So the whole idea was they could generate demand, they could generate leads, they could bring leads into the sales process, they could bring leads into the pipeline, into the process, and then the sales handoff would happen. And then the prospectors, our salespeople, our business developers would take it from there. And what I saw every single time was an inability to integrate what they were doing strategically with what already existed, which was, here's 500 people we know are the right ones on a
Yeah,
list. How do
yeah,
we get these 500? We don't have to go out and boil the ocean on social media all over the place. Just how do we get
yeah.
these 500 people somehow in a flow with a group of business developers and salespeople that we already have, and we already know how to do emails and content and all these other things. It seems simple and obvious, but to do it is another thing.
Well, it's also because I'll keep going back to my broken record. They were doing marketing for marketing's sake. They said lead gen, but they were trying to boil the ocean, like you said. Which, you know what? If you've got a $500,000 marketing budget, by all means, boil the ocean.
That's it. You
You
just
know,
answered the question, which is I priced it out at one point. And when I wrote that book, No Way Back, back in 2019, I started pricing it out. And I was like, for us to do this, we're looking at probably needing a retainer of at least minimum 20 grand a month, at least
minimum.
20 minimum, maybe 30 grand a month to
Yeah.
build a team of capabilities to execute an account-based marketing and an account-based sales strategy against a list. It was that hard to figure out how to do that
Yeah.
in a very complex way based on how marketers think and what they want. That's why it all had to boil down to something simple.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why if you bring it back to brand sculpting, even it's know that message, so you're not boiling the ocean. I'll give the analogy I give to so many people, and it works from my perspective to marketing as well as sales. I don't know how to sell the ocean. I cannot go out to the market with a big, broad, idea of something. It's too large. It's too complex. It's too vast. You have fish in it. You have whales in it. You have ships on it. I don't know how to sell a glass of water. Okay, it's finite. It holds water, quenches my thirst. I can have it cold. I can have it hot. That's about all there is to it. And I can really talk about the benefits it derives for you, what it does for you. It's a glass of water. And you need to think about that in marketing too. most small companies don't want to, they're not Pepsi. They can't go out there with this big, broad, general message to 300 million people. You got to really think about who you're talking to and why it matters. And even do that segmentation. Like marketers love to talk about segmentation. We do it in sales all the time. If you remember, Larry, when I first started with you, I wanted to try our luck in the UK market and do a little bit of a pivot. It worked great. But the first thing I did is I looked at our messaging, and I knew right away that our messaging for the US market would not work for a UK market. They had different needs for our services. They had different desires in what they were doing, and you had to speak to those needs and not desires, not the needs and desires of the US. And it makes a difference. You got to know your market. You really do.
You brought in probably, let me think what it was, 20 grand in revenue in a couple months. And it was untapped, and it was an area we'd never gone into before. And I think what worked was building it within those conversations. So you weren't talking at people. You had a hypothesis. You got on a call with like the wayfinding companies, and there was a few other ones, and you're trying to figure out, what are you guys doing to grow these businesses in the US? And the answer was, we can't figure it out.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the money to open an office. So you're like, and I remember that woman with the ecology product, like I forget what it was, but the sustainability product for big corporate campuses, like all that, those kind of people they had better ideas, they had better products, but they look at the US and they're just overwhelmed. They're like, that's a lot of states to cover.
And they thought that to even begin to dip their toe in the US market, they needed, sorry about that, they needed to have an office and a full sales staff and a presence and trade shows. And we were able to show them, no, that's not what you need. What you need is some dedicated salespeople that understand the market, that can drive your message to the right people with the right messaging. And it made a difference. We brought in a lot of new clients very quickly because we spoke to them.
Yes, and it was a hypothesis, and it wasn't done through marketing. It was done through brand sculpting and thinking about, where's the opportunities? Let's get on the call with some people. We know who they are. You get lists, you get on a call with them and figure out, here's what I think's going on. What do you think? And that led to real tangible business very, very quickly. Going back to brand sculpting again, one of the most frustrating experiences from that whole time was a company in Australia that was in startup mode and had no idea how to help us do brand sculpting, because they were really, if I look back at it, they were fully in the laboratory of, we don't know what this is. Yeah. And instead of engaging a strategic business development capability to figure it out with them, they wanted a sales organization. And as we tried to pivot them to a strategic business development capability, help them figure out what the product should be, they got confused, because they're like, no, we need money, but we also need to know what's going on, and we need money. Somehow those two things have to be separated.
What they didn't know, they didn't even know what they didn't know. And they were like, we want sales, and we're saying, well, we need to really understand what the offer is and who we're going after, what the target is, and why it's important. They said, we don't have time for all that. Just get us sales.
Yes, doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no,
you can get lucky. I mean, you can. I mean, you can sell ice to Eskimos if you push hard enough, but at a certain point, it's just kind of stupid. It's like somebody's got to sit down and say, let's get some money here. Let's take a breath. Let's turn this into business development, not sales. So we actually did that for a lot of companies where they got that and they were like, okay, well, let's figure this market out. You guys we'll help you figure out the market by starting to shift our own thinking and go to we don't know yet mentality.
You could pick up the phone and dial thousands of numbers and just scream watermelon into the line. And eventually you're going to find someone who says, I'd like a watermelon.
That's right.
Doesn't mean you're doing a good job or you're serving yourself.
Well, that's what the AI systems are for now. So you can spam people at larger volume without having to bother. And eventually Google will shut you down. They will shut
Yeah.
down your company. Microsoft will shut down your company. We know a lot about that too.
Yes.
So being high quality in today's world, I think, is going to be a requirement going forward because the AI spam is exploding so quickly. People are going to try to figure out how to shut this down and get it out of their company with B2B.
The biggest problem with AI, and we're getting off topic, we should have a whole conversation about AI. We're using it more and more in OpGen to
Yeah.
very great results, but it's thoughtfully used AI. The problem with AI is it's made it too easy to produce a lot of crap content.
Right.
And the market's just getting flooded with crap. Whereas if you use it well, it could be a great time saver, a great efficiency maker, but it doesn't replace thoughtfulness. It doesn't replace understanding. It's not a person. It's a system, and it's only crap in, crap out. It's only as good as what you feed it. And if you don't feed it well, and you look for it to do your job, it won't. It'll give you exactly what you deserve, quite frankly.
And for anybody listening, we're doing a forum on AI next week. This week it's about the coaching industry at the Entrex Forum, and then the week after at Red Pill Labs, we're going to talk about real use of AI, not the theory of AI or the belief systems about AI. We're going to talk about share your experience about what you see with AI as a receiver of AI stuff or a user of AI. So if you're interested, go to the events page and you can see that up on the events page. One of the things about success in B2B that I've found is when there's a fit between a certain service provider type and a market, where there's a certain company that's just perfect for them because they get each other. There's just this natural resonance I found where we would get our people or me or whatever on the phone with somebody else and it'd be like, where you been all my life? And I think brand sculpting to narrow into that is in some ways the secret weapon of this entire thing.
Those conversations are magic from a sales perspective. When you get to talk to someone you're pitching and they get it and you understand their needs and you get them, those are just magical conversations that go well and are the beginning of a thoughtful and trustful sales process. But the way you get there is by doing that brand sculpting work to begin with, because the way you get to have those conversations is by understanding that person on the other side of the line before you've ever picked up the phone. I know if I'm talking to a CTO, I understand where they're coming from and why this is important. And I want to hit on those topics. And I don't just want to pitch them and bow over them. I also want to listen to them. But you know what? Because of the brand sculpting I've done, they're not going to come at me with things I'm not expecting.
Right.
Because I already know where they're coming from. I'm prepared for that. I mean, I'm prepared for it. I don't know what questions they're going to ask, but I know where they're going to go. And I know why they're going to go there. And that's so important.
And getting into the DNA of that is important. Like I remember years ago, those guys in Seattle that had a really strong technology capability, and they'd done the big projects for Disney and Carnival Cruise Lines and all this.
Yep.
And we started getting them into some really important, serious conversations with some large corporations at the highest levels, CTO level, kind of CIO level sort of conversations. And I remember you were calling afterwards behind those conversations and even in-person meetings. And the potential clients were like, that didn't go well. Yep. And we were like, wait, what happened? So part of brand sculpting, I think, is understanding the engagement of connection as opposed to just talking at somebody because you had a great case study.
And that's what happened with that. It took me a few months of working with that client to teach them that the purpose of a meeting is not to spout off about yourself for 45 minutes. The purpose of the meeting is to understand what their needs are. But again, you should go into understanding, and that company is a great example. They did some really, really impressive customer experience technology solutions. They did it for Disney, they did it for Carnival Cruise, and we got them in front of some really big hitters. And in the end, they knew how to do it and it was working great. But in the beginning, they would just talk at people. We did this, we did this, we did this. Look at how great we are. And nobody wants to hear that. But it also goes, if I'm talking to a CTO, I'm talking about systems, and I'm talking about integrations, and I'm talking about how it can enhance what they're doing and how it won't be difficult for them and how it won't crash their systems. If I'm talking to a chief experience officer, I'm talking about guest engagement, and I'm talking about forming memories, and I'm talking about what it means to engage with their brand before a trip and after a trip and during a trip, and how these experiences will enhance their brand. Just I'm pitching the exact same product, but very different conversations to different people.
I think what you're saying is so subtle and so important and so misunderstood. And this idea of targeting and account-based marketing and account-based selling and being able to understand personas is is very, very much often a malpractice kind of exercise. It's an exercise in malpractice, because to do it without common sense ruins the whole thing, because then you got a whole bunch of people reading scripts and reading templates, and it just becomes this total mess, which is a marketing mess fundamentally, because it's been all overthought. But if I'm speaking with a CTO, I'm speaking with a CIO, they're like, I do not want another screwed up technology project, and I don't want to deal with another company that I can't get to understand that we have limitations in our technology stack. I don't want to hear all their great, cool Deloitte level stuff and all their philosophy. And okay, now I'm talking to a chief experience officer. It's a little bit different. They're reading the Deloitte stuff and they want to go there, right? So understanding just through common sense the complex sale dynamic. Now that's a whole nother conversation we could have and talk forever about it. But that's brand sculpting. Brand sculpting does not mean I figure out my great thing and now I'm going to go figure out how to tell you my elevator message and just push it hard. That doesn't work at all. Not in a complex sale.
No, and we even, one of the things we take pains here at Opta to do is to distinguish ourselves from lead generation services or appointment setting services or fractional SDR services. We are not that. We are a B2B sales agency that does full cycle sales and does enterprise level sales or mid-market sales of complex products for our clients. And that brand sculpting part of what we do is integral to everything we do. A lead generation company will go in there and ask for maybe 45 minutes of their time, just long enough to get a, barely surface understanding and put together a quick script and off to the races. It's a recipe for failure. We take a deep dive because we need to understand the history, why it's important, where they've gone, what their clients are like, what are the personas, and whether you are a solopreneur and reaching out to people in the market, or you are a small but growing startup, or a more advanced but mid-market business, you gotta understand these things. It goes across verticals. You gotta understand it.
So these principles apply differently depending on who the person is and what they're trying to do and what they care about, and whether it's just a business thing to get results or it's a personally connected mission. It's still the same principles underneath. They just apply different. So what Glen's talking about from a B2B standpoint, I'm looking at it from a, build your entrepreneur company a viewpoint. And we just did we do a More Money Now session daily where it's the same thing. It's product. It starts with product. What do you got? And that product can be as deeply purpose-based and connected as you want it to be. For some people, it's just, here's how I make money. For other people, this is the impact I want to make in the world. It's the same thing though, still. It's just the approach you're going to take will be a little bit different. But I think what we're seeing here, I won't go through all the stages of More Money Now, but if you go to the events page, you'll see, and you can sign up and come in and join us. But the whole idea of product is start with product. Start with product. Start with what you've got. I would say 90% of the people I see out in the marketplace right now start with marketing. How can I sell it? They just want to know, how can I sell it and how can I do it as easy as possible? And then they want to automate it all. That's not going to work today. unless you're really good and you got a serious budget.
Yeah, yeah. And automation is great, but if you don't understand who you're talking to and really how to target them, you're just putting more garbage out there, and it's not going to get you where you want to go. And
We
at the end
should
of the day,
do
that's what we want.
we should do a talk on valuable content. So you remember when it was called valuable content back in the HubSpot
Yes,
days when that stuff was all
yes.
starting? So
And
what
the
is it
idea
now?
that I just put a good article out there, the leads will come flying in.
Right. And it was kind of valuable at one point, and now we call it marketing spam.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Glenn.
All right, Larry. I'll catch you in a little bit. Thanks for your
Yep.
time.
All right. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here and talk a little bit about what we were talking about. So the idea of starting with product does not mean figuring out how to market the thing you've got. It doesn't mean that. Now, you can do that. So if you don't really care about the product, if you just care about the results and how to make more money faster and position yourself against your ideal target avatar and persona and run the playbook, that's a marketing process and it works. What I would encourage people to understand is that it's hard and costs a ton of money to figure out how to take something average or that's good but hard to understand, or something that will, from the marketing lens, sound the same at the end of the day if the marketing company does not require you as the business owner or the entrepreneur or the coach or consultant or whatever it is to go deep. If they want you to go deep, make sure it's real. So often when I see, and I've experienced this and I've done this too with clients, wrong. It's not that it's wrong as much as that it just doesn't work anymore because things have changed so much because the markets are so crowded now and everybody's doing all these things. So if you're going to position a company effectively, there's a deep soul searching realization of this is what I have that's good. This is why it's good. And this is who it's for. And this is who I want to be with. People skip that step. That's starting with product. That's starting with product. And that's a hypothesis. And that's brought into the market, colliding into the market. It doesn't matter how you're doing it. You're watching the data, the marketing data, and seeing what people are doing and using analytics. You're not talking to anybody. That's fine too. Or you're really having deep conversations with people and you're trying to figure out, what do you think about this? What's going on here for you in relation to what I'm saying? I'm not adjusting what I'm saying because of what you say. I want to see if there's resonance. It all works the same way. How this works in these basic principles, what Glenn calls brand sculpting and what he's doing with B2B and what I'm doing with More Money Now with these 5 stages that people work through is the same thing fundamentally. And you can approach it as, I'm going to figure out what will work in this marketplace to get money out of the market into my pocket, or I'm going to figure out what I've got that's really valuable because it is, and I'm an expert and I know what I'm doing and why is it valuable and who is it for before I even think about whether that'll work or not. And I see it as a hypothesis. And then I bring it out in the marketplace through different connecting approaches. And then I ask people, does this resonate with you? What do you think? What's going on with you? As opposed to try to get them to do what I want. Now that approach still works. It's just an old way to do it. Is it dying? You decide. I think it's dying because I think the market's exhausted. Stop marketing to me. Stop selling me. Stop prospecting to me because everyone knows the playbook. It's not new anymore. So the valuable content playbook, the demand generation HubSpot playbook from years ago, it's done. The conversational marketing playbook from Drift and AI and all this from years ago, it's done. It's done. It's exhausting people. The analytics playbook from data that the ad networks are using, like Facebook, Meta, Google, YouTube. It's done. We all see it. Even my mom, she's 85 years old. She sees it. She doesn't understand how it works. I was explaining dynamic pricing to her, and she's like, that's terrible. What does dynamic pricing mean? I learned about it when I worked in the hotel industry when I was in college. Now they do it with analytics online in the ad networks. Amazon uses it every day, all day long. And so if you're going to book a trip too with travel, the travel industry has been doing this for years. I think that's where a lot of it maybe started. Dynamic pricing just means the price changes depending on how many factors, but it's all based on how much they think they can get. And that's horrible, frustrating. I'm not talking about the morality of it. I'm just saying it's exhausting to try to figure out if I'm going to buy a pair of shoes and there's 5 different prices depending on what browser I use to log on and my past history based on my own data pattern that these companies have constructed in their algorithmic models, and they're running through AI systems and dynamically adjusting the pricing. And what I see on my browser, on my computer screen, I feel like I'm going to get ripped off. And that's how my mother felt, and she's in her 80s. I don't have to explain the technology underneath it and how it works. It's obvious to her that's what's going on. And everyone, that playbook extracts money out of the marketplace. It still works. Is it new? Ask yourself that. Do you want to run an old playbook? It's also hard to do, and it's super expensive. How did I learn about dynamic pricing? I worked at a hotel. So I was at the front desk of a hotel when I was in college, and the rooms were $49 or $450. Was it a different room? No, it was the same room. So I'm checking people in, and they were like, don't show anybody. So they had a rule about don't put the card up on the desk with the room rate on it because someone else in line might see. So we had people coming in from overseas and their room was $450. We had people coming down to DC from New York and it was $49 because they knew how it worked. They knew, oh, the hotels give deals on the weekends. Somebody in France or Germany or whatever that was coming into DC to do business, they didn't know that. So they paid $450. That was before the technology was available and all of the online travel agency stuff online, the OTAs. It was before that. It was before dynamic pricing worked on systems like Amazon. So we're all aware this is going on, and it's exhausting, and it's hard to book a trip today even. I hate online travel. I can't stand it. I remember the days when I could call my travel agent, Karen, and say, hey, I'm going somewhere. I had a very complicated schedule when I was running my distribution company. And I was traveling all over the country. And it was like, we had to make a lot of money in 2 months. And then we didn't work for a long time. And then the season would come back and we work again. I had to be there. Like, I got an appointment in Minneapolis with this buyers. And then I got to go to Dayton, Ohio. And then we got to drive to Indianapolis. And then we've got to, it was complicated. She organized that entire thing with calling the airlines, and she did all the hard work. She was great at it. That would have crushed me if I had to do that online. I'm not saying online's bad. People are going to hear this stuff and be like, what does he think? We don't want to go backward? No, of course we don't want to go backwards. Transparency and simplicity and a higher quality experience is what people want today. They don't want more confusion. And they know you're trying to rip them off with all this stuff you're doing. If you're a business playing those playbooks, they know it. They see it. It's obvious. So if you want to win today, consider an experience-based playbook. Consider transparency. Consider starting with product and thinking, what have I got? Why is this so great? Why is it really great? Like, ask yourself, like, ponder it a little. Do some brand sculpting. Take the time. Slow down to speed up. Sit down and think and ask yourself, why do I want to do this? Why am I even doing this in the first place? Is where I went. Now, you don't have to go as deep as I did, but just go to is my company any good actually? Like, when is it good? When are we good? When are we good? When are we great? Oh, oh, we're great at this. Why? And for who? Who are those people? Who are those people? Before you start to figure out how to make money in the marketplace, don't skip this first step.